So sample size is a very important feature for a researcher. So one has to determine the sample size very clearly, highly important in terms of understanding the levels at which we are going to do it. A relatively simple situation is an estimation of proportion. Depends on the nature of research that you are involved with. Good morning and welcome to the second session in Unit 4 in Business Research Methods, where we are going to talk about determination of sample size using statistical techniques. Let's just move further to understand what is this sample size all about. Now, the sample size determination is the act of choosing the number of observations or replications which are used in a statistical sample. No doubt about it. Why? Because sample size does matter a lot in terms of understanding what exactly and how we need to select it so that we are able to get a very good statistical inference altogether. Followed by the sample size is important feature for any empirical study, which is the goal to make the inference about the population. Why? Because using the sample size, the selected population that we are going to study, that is going to give out an exact inference of what it is, what is the meaning, what is the inference that's going to come out of it. So sample size is a very important feature for a researcher. In practice, the sample size is used in a study which is usually based on the cost, time, convenience, collecting of data, the need for the offer sufficient statistical power or the factor altogether. So without the sample size, you will not be able to govern the data management at any point of time. So it's very important for all of us to understand the sample size factor. In general, what I would like to say here is that with the sample size coming into picture, you will be able to understand the importance of the data management and importance of how a statistical research can be done at the best level possible. Now, moving further, in complicated studies, there might be several different sample sizes. For example, in a stratified survey, there would be different sizes for each of the stratum. So that is very important for all of us to know. Followed by, in a census data, the data is sought out of the entire population and we are intending to take a sample size equal to that of the population. In an experimental design, now when we move to a different format where the study might be differentiated or divided into different groups altogether. So everywhere we try to understand this factor that the sample size is a very important factor through which you will be able to select that respective order and then you will be able to get the correct statistical inference altogether. Now, choosing a sample size might be chosen using an experience. Now, what do I mean by an experience? Small samples through sometimes unavoidable can result in a wide confidence altogether intervals, and the risk of errors in statistical hypothesis testing is always there. So what we try to do here is that the small samples, though sometimes are unavoidable, can result in confidence level and they can risk the statistical factor. So one has to determine the sample size very clearly because one has to see the impact factor coming in as how the correct level of statistics is being used, at what levels we are using it, what is the kind of inference that we are getting out of it. Next, using a target variance for an estimate to be derived from the sample eventually that is obtained from, if a high precision is required, that is always there, followed by which translate to a low target variance of the estimator. So that is also very important for us to understand here. Why? Because using a target variance for an estimate factor, you will be able to actually obtain the sample, you will be actually able to obtain the techniques, which is very helpful for us in terms of determining the sample size which can be used in the statistical data. followed by using a target for the power of statistical test to be applied. Once a sample is collected, we can use that test power, we can use that sample size to test the entire statistical value, and using a confidence level, the larger we require the confidence level. Now for example, we say that we require a sample size which has been given at a larger size, at a larger sample altogether, then we require a constant precision to come inside, a constant factor to come inside. So that is why I would always say that this is very, very important for all of us. This is highly important in terms of understanding the levels at which we are going to do it. Followed by, let's try to understand a very important factor called as estimation. How are you going to estimate a sample size? A relatively simple situation is an estimation of proportion. Now when I use the word estimation of proportion, that means to say that for that given small sample, how are you going to estimate the value? What levels are you going to estimate? For example, we may wish to estimate the proportion of residents in a community who are about 65 years old. So when I take a small gated community and I want to estimate the number of people living in that sector who are above 65 years. So what I am trying to do here is that I am only taking a very, very small proportion out of the entire big population and trying to find out who are of 65 years and above. So that gives me an estimated value altogether. Now the estimation of mean. How can be the estimation of mean done? Proportion is special in the case of mean, while estimating the population mean using an independent and identical distributed sample size. That's why I use the word IID here, which means identically distributed sample size of n. N is the population size. Each value will have a variance of sigma squared. Value here, the standard error of the mean is given by the formula. This is the formula which we are going to use. Mean is equal to sum of all data points divided by number of data points. That's the mean here, and mean can be also used by assumed mean method, by the sum of all deviations by the total number of data points. So this will be able to help you to understand the value of mean at any given point of time. This formula is important because we are going to calculate the mean value using this standardization, followed by the stratified sample size, which is even more interesting for us to know. Why? Because with more complicated sampling techniques such as stratified sampling, the sample can often be split up into subsamples. Typically, if there are such subsamples from H difference data, then each one of them will have a sample size, that is NH is equal to 1, 2, 3, and we will have different sample size altogether. Now what is the stratified sample size altogether? When you have a complicated sampling, that there are many features, minute features, complicated data size or elements coming into a sampling technique, then the sample can be often split up into subsamples. So when you keep on breaking it into smaller and smaller samples altogether, now there will be typically H different subsamples, different methodologies altogether, and that's where you will be calculating the value from 1 to H typically. So this is what we say by the stratified sampling size. Next, we have the qualitative research, which says that sample size determination in qualitative studies takes a different approach. It is not the same like a quantitative data. It is generally subjective judgment as taken as the research proceeds, because it depends on the nature of research that you are involved with. Followed by, one approach is to continue include further participants or material until the result is being achieved. Why? Because this is qualitative research. In the qualitative research, you have to take the research till the point until you achieve the result, and this will include lot of complicated factors which have to be understood clearly, and then only you will be able to attain the result. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that the session was of great help and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we will be speaking about the further research techniques and the scaling methodologies that are being used in the business environment today. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.